Who does this boy think he is, standing in the back like that? Does he even know how to hold a violin? The famous violinist's mocking words cut through the prestigious academy hall as all eyes turned to Marcus, the only black student in the room. With pain shooting through his back from a previous teacher's brutal punishment, Marcus couldn't sit, but he could play. What happens when talent that's been dismissed finally gets its moment? When the same hands they laughed at create music that silences a room full of doubters? I just played how the music made me feel, Marcus would later say, after everything changed. But what led to that extraordinary moment, and how did a community college student end up challenging one of classical music's biggest stars? Watch this incredible true story unfold, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspirational content that will move your heart and open your mind. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Marcus Johnson's fingers danced across the strings of his second-hand violin, coaxing out the final haunting notes of Vivaldi's Winter. The melody echoed through the small apartment he shared with his mother in East Grove. As the last note faded, he winced, shifting his weight to ease the persistent pain in his lower back. "That was beautiful, honey," Sophia Johnson said, poking her head into the living room. Despite working double shifts at the hospital, dark circles under her eyes, she never missed an opportunity to encourage her son's passion. "Thanks, Mom," Marcus replied, carefully placing his violin in its worn case. "Dr. Williams says I'm getting better at the dynamics." As if summoned by his name, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Dr. James Williams, Marcus's mentor from the community college music program. The tall, distinguished black man had taken Marcus under his wing 2 years ago after hearing him play at a local church event. "That Vivaldi is coming along nicely," Dr. Williams said after greetings were exchanged. "Your vibrato has improved tremendously." Marcus beamed at the praise but couldn't hide a grimace as he shifted his position. "Back still bothering you?" Dr. Williams asked, his expression darkening. Sophia sighed. "That incident with Ms. Patterson last year, the doctor says there's no permanent damage, but it flares up when he practices too long." The memory hung heavily in the air, the cruel teacher who had struck Marcus across his back with a ruler when he dared to correct her about Beethoven's birth year, sending him crashing into a desk corner. The school had dismissed her, but the physical and emotional scars remained. "Well, I have some news that might lift your spirits," Dr. Williams said, pulling out an envelope. The Westfield Academy of Music is hosting a special 3-day masterclass with Victor Harlow. Marcus's eyes widened. "The Victor Harlow? The violin virtuoso?" "The very same," Dr. Williams confirmed. "I've secured you an invitation." Sophia frowned. "Westfield? Isn't that the private school across town where all the rich kids go?" "It is," Dr. Williams acknowledged. "But this is an opportunity too good to pass up. Marcus has the talent to impress even someone like Harlow." Marcus held the invitation reverently. "I've watched all his performances online. His Bach interpretations are incredible." "The masterclass starts Monday," Dr. Williams continued. "Director Miller has agreed to let you participate based on my recommendation, though she seemed skeptical." "They always are," Sophia muttered. "I want to go," Marcus said firmly. "I need to go." Dr. Williams smiled. "I thought you might say that. Just remember, no matter how anyone there treats you, your talent speaks for itself." As Dr. Williams left, Marcus returned to his violin, ignoring the pain in his back as he practiced with renewed purpose. Opportunity was knocking, and despite everything, he was determined to answer. The imposing facade of Westfield Academy of Music loomed before Marcus as he clutched his violin case tightly. Gothic architecture and manicured lawns screamed old money and privilege, worlds away from his neighborhood. Students in expensive clothes streamed past him, barely giving him a second glance as he stood frozen at the entrance. "You look lost," a voice said beside him. A girl with auburn hair and kind eyes extended her hand. "I'm Eliza Thompson. Are you here for the Harlow Masterclass?" Yes, Marcus nodded, shaking her hand. I'm Marcus Johnson. This place is, a lot. It can be overwhelming, Eliza agreed. I've been attending since I was 6. Let me show you where to go. As they walked through marble hallways adorned with portraits of famous composers, all white men, Marcus couldn't help but recall the last time he'd entered an unfamiliar music classroom. The memory came flooding back unbidden. Sit down, boy. Ms. Patterson had snapped when he'd questioned her lecture. When he politely corrected her about Beethoven's birth date, her face had contorted with rage. How dare you contradict me? The ruler had come down hard across his back, sending him sprawling into the corner of a desk. The pain had been excruciating, but worse was the humiliation as classmates watched in horror. Are you okay? Eliza's voice pulled him back to the present. You went pale. Just nervous, Marcus lied, rubbing his back instinctively. They arrived at a large rehearsal hall where about 20 students were already seated, instruments at the ready. At the front, a stern-looking woman with silver-streaked hair was checking names off a list. Beside her stood another familiar face that made Marcus's blood run cold, Ms. Reynolds, the same teacher who had witnessed his humiliation by Ms. Patterson and had done nothing to help. Director Miller, Eliza called, leading Marcus forward. This is Marcus Johnson. He's joining the masterclass. Director Patricia Miller peered down at Marcus over her reading glasses. Ah, yes. Dr. Williams's project. The way she said it made clear what she thought of community college music programs. We don't typically admit students without formal classical training. I've been playing since I was 4, Marcus said quietly but firmly. Well, we'll see if you can keep up. She gestured to the seating area. Find a place quickly. Mr. Harlow will arrive shortly. Marcus nodded and followed Eliza, but as he approached the chairs, Ms. Reynolds stepped forward, her eyes narrowing in recognition. You're the boy from East Grove Middle School, aren't you? She asked coldly. The one who caused all that trouble in Patricia Patterson's class last year. Marcus stiffened. I didn't cause trouble, ma'am. Reynolds laughed dismissively. That's not how I remember it. As Marcus moved to take a seat, a sharp twinge in his back made him wince. The chairs were hard-backed and unforgiving, sitting through hours of class would be tortuous. I'll need to stand, please, he told Director Miller. Medical reasons. Reynolds scoffed. Attention-seeking, more likely. Director Miller frowned. Very well. Stand at the back then. But don't disrupt the class. Marcus moved to the back wall, ignoring the curious stares. Eliza shot him a sympathetic look before taking her seat. As the clock struck 9, the doors swung open dramatically, and a hush fell over the room. Victor Harlow had arrived. Victor Harlow swept into the room like a force of nature, commanding attention without saying a word. Tall and imposing with silver-streaked black hair and a tailored charcoal suit, he carried his priceless Stradivarius with casual confidence. His piercing blue eyes surveyed the room with the calculating gaze of a predator assessing prey. Good morning, young musicians, he announced, his cultured British accent filling the space. For those who somehow don't know, I am Victor Harlow. You may have seen me perform at Carnegie Hall, Royal Albert Hall, or perhaps watched my Netflix documentary. He smiled thinly. I rarely teach, so consider yourselves fortunate. Director Miller has assured me you represent the finest young talent in the region. Marcus watched from his position against the back wall, both intimidated and inspired. This was the man whose recordings he'd studied religiously, whose technique he tried to emulate for years. I expect perfection, Harlow continued, placing his violin case on the table with ceremonial precision. Nothing less. Music is not a democracy, it's a meritocracy. Talent rises, mediocrity sinks. Director Miller stepped forward. Mr. Harlow, we're honored to have you. Students, please introduce yourselves when called. The introductions began, each student standing to announce their name, experience, and musical accomplishments. Marcus listened as students mentioned private tutors from Juilliard, summer programs in Vienna, and performances with youth orchestras across the country. The gap between their world and his felt increasingly vast. Eliza Thompson, his new friend, announced when her turn came. Violin for 10 years, attended Interlaken Arts Camp last summer, concertmaster of the Westfield Orchestra. Harlow nodded approvingly at several students, particularly a confident boy named Charles who mentioned his father's position on the symphony board. When the introductions reached the back row, Director Miller hesitated before calling Marcus Johnson, our guest student. All heads turned to look at him. Marcus straightened despite the pain in his back. Marcus Johnson. I've played violin for 10 years, studying with Dr. Williams at the community college program. Harlow's eyebrows rose. Community college. How quaint. A few students snickered. And why, pray tell, are you standing back there instead of sitting properly with the others? Before Marcus could answer, Ms. Reynolds leaned over to whisper something in Harlow's ear. His expression shifted from mild curiosity to dismissive amusement. I see, he said, though Marcus had no chance to explain. Well, Mr. Johnson, I hope your playing posture is better than your classroom posture. More laughter rippled through the room. Marcus felt his cheeks burn but kept his expression neutral, remembering Dr. Williams's words, let your talent speak for itself. Now, Harlow announced, lifting his Stradivarius, I'll demonstrate the Bach chaconne from Partita No. 2, which we'll be studying this week. Listen carefully to the articulation. What followed was undeniably brilliant. Harlow's playing was technically flawless, his interpretation bold and commanding. Marcus found himself momentarily forgetting his discomfort, drawn into the mathematics and emotion of Bach's masterpiece. When Harlow finished, the room erupted in applause. He accepted it as his due, before saying, now, let's see what you're working with. Mr. Richardson, since your father speaks so highly of you, why don't you begin? Charles Richardson played competently, if somewhat mechanically. Harlow stopped him frequently, demonstrating passages, correcting his bowing technique. Better, he would say, though still lacking depth. One by one, students performed. Harlow moved through the room, offering detailed critiques to some, barely acknowledging others. His pattern became clear, the students from influential families received the most attention, while those without connections were treated perfunctorily. Marcus noticed Eliza watching him with concern as the class continued. He remained standing, shifting his weight occasionally to manage the pain, never losing focus despite being ignored. Near the end of the session, Harlow finally looked toward the back of the room, his gaze falling on Marcus. Ah, our standing gentleman. Still with us? I almost forgot you were there. Yes, sir, Marcus replied evenly. Good. Because tomorrow, everyone plays. No exceptions. Harlow's smile didn't reach his eyes. Even our community college curiosity. As the class was dismissed, Marcus felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. Tomorrow would be his chance to prove himself, or to face even greater humiliation. The second day of the masterclass dawned with a steady rain that matched Marcus's mood. His back had ached terribly throughout the night, the pain a constant reminder of past injustice. Still, he arrived at Westfield Academy early, determined to find a quiet corner to warm up before the session began. He found an empty practice room and lost himself in scales and arpeggios, his fingers finding comfort in the familiar patterns. The door creaked open, startling him mid-phrase. Sorry, Eliza said, slipping inside. You sound good. Much better than half the students Harlow praised yesterday. Marcus smiled gratefully. Thanks. Did you need the room? No, I came to warn you, she said, lowering her voice. Ms. Reynolds has been talking to Director Miller and Harlow about you. I overheard them in the office. Marcus's stomach tightened. What did she say? Something about you being a troublemaker. She called you that difficult boy from East Grove who assaulted a teacher. Eliza looked disgusted. That can't be true. It's not, Marcus replied, his jaw tense. Ms. Patterson hit me with a ruler when I corrected a mistake she made during a lecture. I fell into a desk and injured my back. That's why I can't sit for long periods. Eliza's eyes widened. That's awful. Have you told Director Miller? Would she believe me over Ms. Reynolds? Marcus asked bitterly. The warning bell rang, cutting their conversation short. They hurried to the rehearsal hall, where Victor Harlow was already holding court, surrounded by admiring students and parents. Marcus recognized Jonathan Parker, a wealthy businessman whose donations funded much of the arts scene in their city. "Ah, Mr. Parker," Harlow was saying. "Your support of the arts is legendary. Perhaps we'll discover the next prodigy right here." "One can hope," Parker replied, his gaze sweeping the room dismissively. As Marcus took his position at the back wall, Ms. Reynolds approached Harlow again, whispering while glancing in Marcus's direction. Harlow nodded, a smirk playing at his lips. "Today," Harlow announced once everyone was settled, "we'll focus on emotional expression within technical precision. Many young players mistake sentimentality for depth." The masterclass proceeded much like the previous day, with Harlow lavishing attention on certain students while barely acknowledging others. When Eliza played, he was surprisingly harsh. "Miss Thompson, your technique is adequate, but your interpretation lacks conviction. Perhaps you're distracted today." His eyes flicked toward Marcus, and Eliza blushed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harlow," she murmured. "I'll work harder." When Charles Richardson played, Harlow was effusive. "Excellent progress from yesterday. The phrasing is much improved." Marcus noticed that Charles's playing, while competent, lacked the emotional nuance that Eliza had brought to her performance. The unfairness of it all made his fingers tighten around his violin. Halfway through the class, Marcus raised his hand to ask a question about a particular bowing technique Harlow had demonstrated. The violinist looked past him, calling on another student instead. Marcus tried again later, only to be ignored once more. During a brief break, Director Miller approached him. "Mr. Johnson, several students have mentioned feeling uncomfortable with you standing behind them. Perhaps it would be better if you positioned yourself by the door." "I'm not doing anything wrong," Marcus protested quietly. "Nevertheless," she insisted, "we must consider everyone's comfort." As Marcus reluctantly moved to his new, even more isolated position, he caught Ms. Reynolds smiling smugly. The message was clear: he didn't belong here. When the class resumed, Harlow announced, "Tomorrow will be our final day together. Each of you will perform a solo piece of your choice. Prepare something that showcases your strengths, assuming you have some." His gaze lingered pointedly on Marcus. As students filed out after class, Marcus overheard Charles talking to his friends. "Did you see that kid from the community program? Standing there like he's too good to sit with the rest of us." "I heard he attacked a teacher," another student whispered. "They probably only let him in because of some diversity initiative." Marcus clutched his violin case tighter, fighting back the hot sting of tears. Tomorrow would be his only chance to prove them all wrong. The final day of the masterclass arrived with a sense of anticipation hanging in the air. Students clutched their sheet music nervously as they filed into the rehearsal hall, which had been rearranged to create a small performance space at the front. Several parents and benefactors, including Jonathan Parker, sat in a row of chairs at the back, there to witness the culmination of Victor Harlow's teaching. Marcus arrived early but found his usual spot by the door blocked by additional chairs. Ms. Reynolds approached with a clipboard, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Marcus, I'm afraid with our special guests, you'll need to stand in the corner behind the piano. We can't have you disrupting the sightlines." Each small indignity built upon the last, but Marcus simply nodded and moved to the designated spot, which put him almost completely out of view of both Harlow and the audience. He carefully unpacked his violin, running through fingerings mentally as he tried to ignore the throbbing in his back. Victor Harlow entered to polite applause, looking particularly imperious in a tailored blue suit. "Welcome to our final session," he announced. "Today, you'll demonstrate what you've learned. Director Miller has provided a sign-up sheet. Who would like to begin?" Charles Richardson volunteered first, naturally. He performed a technically proficient Paganini caprice that earned enthusiastic praise from Harlow. "Excellent control," the master violinist declared. "You've clearly absorbed my guidance." One by one, students performed. Eliza played beautifully, her rendition of Mendelssohn earning grudging approval from Harlow. "Competent," he allowed, which from him was high praise indeed. As the list dwindled, Marcus realized with dismay that his name hadn't been called. He raised his hand, but Harlow steadfastly ignored him. Finally, after the last scheduled student finished, Marcus spoke up. "Excuse me, Mr. Harlow. I'd like to play as well." The room fell silent. Harlow turned slowly, eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "Ah, our standing observer speaks. I wasn't aware you were prepared to perform." "I am," Marcus said firmly. "I've been prepared since day one." Something in his tone made Harlow's eyes narrow. "Very well. Let's see if standing has any advantages for violin performance." As Marcus made his way to the front, Ms. Reynolds whispered something to Director Miller, who frowned deeply. The tension in the room was palpable. "What will you be playing for us?" Harlow asked, his tone making it clear he expected little. "Bach's Chaconne," Marcus answered without hesitation. "The same piece you demonstrated on the first day." Murmurs rippled through the audience. The Chaconne was notoriously difficult, one of the most challenging pieces in the violin repertoire. Harlow laughed, not bothering to hide his derision. "My dear boy, perhaps something simpler would be more appropriate for your level." "I've been practicing this piece for over a year," Marcus replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. Under the guidance of a community college teacher, Harlow scoffed. "How ambitious." Ms. Reynolds stepped forward. "Perhaps we should be mindful of our time, Mr. Harlow." The parents. "No, no," Harlow interrupted, a cruel smile playing at his lips. "I'm curious now. Let the boy attempt it." He gestured grandly toward the performance space. "The floor is yours, Mr. Johnson. Mind you don't fall." The reference to his injury was deliberate and cutting. Marcus felt his face burn as he took position, aware of every eye in the room upon him. "Before I begin," Marcus said, "I'd like to explain that I'm standing because of a back injury I sustained when a teacher struck me for correcting her mistake." Shocked gasps came from some of the parents. Ms. Reynolds stepped forward, her face flushed. "That's not what happened. Let him play," came a firm voice from the back of the room. Jonathan Parker was watching with newfound interest. Marcus raised his violin, closed his eyes, and began to play. The first notes of Bach's Chaconne hung in the air as Marcus drew his bow across the strings. His initial phrases were tentative, weighed down by the pressure of hostile eyes and years of being told he didn't belong. A slight tremor in his left hand caused a missed note, eliciting a smirk from Harlow and a disappointed headshake from Director Miller. "Perhaps too ambitious after all," Harlow murmured loudly enough for everyone to hear. The comment struck Marcus like a physical blow. For a moment, his mind went blank, fingers frozen on the fingerboard. In that suspended second, he stood at a crossroads, retreat into shame or find the courage to continue. Then, unbidden, memories flooded in. His mother working double shifts to buy his first real violin. Dr. Williams staying late after community classes to help him master difficult passages. Hours of practice in their small apartment, playing until his fingers bled and his back screamed in protest. In his mind's eye, Marcus saw himself at age 7, transfixed by a YouTube video of a black violinist performing with a major symphony. "That could be you someday," his mother had whispered. "Don't let anyone tell you where you belong." Something shifted inside him. His spine straightened despite the pain, and when he raised the violin again, his eyes were no longer seeking approval, they were fixed on a point beyond the judgmental faces before him. The Chaconne resumed, but differently now. Each note resonated with newfound conviction. The complex chord progressions that had initially faltered now flowed from his fingers with growing confidence. Bach's mathematical precision merged with something deeply personal, the language of his own journey. As he played, the rehearsal hall faded away. He was no longer performing for Harlow or the Westfield elite. He was playing for the boy who'd been struck for speaking truth, for his mother who believed in him when no one else did, for every child told to make themselves smaller to fit someone else's expectations. The pain in his back became secondary to the music flowing through him. Each phrase told a story: struggle, persistence, defiance, hope. The Bach that emerged wasn't a perfect imitation of Harlow's technically brilliant rendition from the first day. It was something else entirely, authentic and alive. 3 minutes into the piece, Marcus opened his eyes briefly and caught sight of Eliza. She was watching him with undisguised admiration, her eyes glistening with tears. Beyond her, Jonathan Parker had leaned forward in his seat, his expression transformed from bored patronage to genuine engagement. Even more surprisingly, some of the students who had previously dismissed him were now watching with expressions ranging from shock to grudging respect. Only Harlow, Ms. Reynolds, and Director Miller maintained their masks of skepticism, though even they couldn't completely hide their surprise at the quality of his playing. The chaconne built toward its climactic section, the technical demands escalating with every measure. Marcus's fingers flew across the strings, executing the double and triple stops that had once seemed impossible. The rich harmonies filled the space, bouncing off marble and mahogany to create a cathedral of sound. A sharp pain lanced through his back, nearly causing him to stumble. For a heartbeat, the music threatened to collapse. But Marcus drew upon reserves of determination built through years of pushing against barriers both visible and invisible. He adjusted his stance slightly and pushed through the pain, refusing to let his body betray his spirit. As the final variation approached, Marcus felt something rare and precious, the perfect union of technical mastery and emotional truth. The Bach that had once been a mountain to climb was now a vehicle carrying him to heights he'd only imagined. This was why he played, why he endured, why he refused to give up even when the world seemed determined to silence him. The final phrases of the chaconne descended like a benediction. The last note lingered in the air, a testament to persistence that even Harlow's disapproval couldn't diminish. When silence finally reclaimed the hall, Marcus lowered his violin slowly, his breath coming in short gasps from exertion and emotion. The pain in his back reasserted itself immediately, but something else had changed. Standing there amid the stunned silence, Marcus Johnson had discovered a truth no teacher could impart, that true music comes not from perfect technique but from the courage to speak one's own truth through the language of notes. The silence stretched for what seemed an eternity. Then, from the back row, a single person began to applaud. The solitary applause echoed through the silent hall, growing louder as its source stood up. Dr. James Williams, tall and distinguished in his tweed jacket, had slipped in during Marcus's performance and now applauded with unrestrained pride. "Bravo, Marcus," he called out, his deep voice carrying throughout the room. "Absolutely bravo." His enthusiasm broke the spell of silence. Eliza joined in immediately, then Jonathan Parker, then most of the students and parents until the rehearsal hall filled with applause. Only Victor Harlow, Director Miller, and Ms. Reynolds remained frozen in their seats, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. Marcus bowed slightly, wincing at the movement, then made his way back to his corner. As he passed Eliza, she whispered, "That was incredible." Dr. Williams strode to the front of the room, extending his hand to Harlow. "Victor, it's been years. Vienna, 2010, I believe. You might not remember me, I was with the International Classical Fellowship when you performed the Sibelius Concerto." Harlow's face flickered with recognition as he stood to shake Dr. Williams's hand. "Dr. Williams. Of course. I didn't realize you were affiliated with this event." "I wouldn't miss my student's performance," Dr. Williams replied, emphasizing the word "my" with subtle pride. "Especially when that student has the potential Marcus does." Director Miller stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with this unexpected development. "Dr. Williams, we weren't expecting you today. Mr. Harlow's masterclass is by invitation only." "Yes, and you invited Marcus," Dr. Williams interrupted smoothly. "I'm simply here to support him." He turned to face the students and parents. "What you just witnessed was not merely technical proficiency, but genuine artistry. That interpretation of the chaconne showed remarkable maturity. Harlow cleared his throat. While there were some interesting choices in the performance, I'm afraid there were also numerous technical flaws that would need significant correction. Really? Dr. Williams raised an eyebrow. I'd be interested to hear your specific critiques, Victor. The intonation was nearly perfect, the voicing of the chords was clearly articulated, and the architectural understanding of the piece was evident throughout. The challenge in his tone was unmistakable. For perhaps the first time in the masterclass, Harlow appeared uncomfortable. Jonathan Parker rose from his seat, approaching the small group at the front. I must say, I found the young man's performance quite moving. Raw in places, perhaps, but undeniably powerful. Mr. Parker, Director Miller said, clearly relieved to address someone whose annual donations kept Westfield's lights on. Always a pleasure to have your expert opinion. Hardly expert, Parker chuckled, just appreciative. And what I appreciate is authentic talent. He turned to Marcus. Young man, where have you studied? Before Marcus could answer, Dr. Williams interjected. Marcus has been part of my community outreach program for the past 3 years, Mr. Parker. Before that, he was largely self-taught, learning from YouTube videos and library books. Self-taught? Parker seemed impressed. And the chaconne is self-assigned? Yes, sir, Marcus replied quietly. I've been working on it for 14 months. Remarkable, Parker murmured. Director Miller, you found quite a diamond in the rough here. Director Miller's smile tightened. Mr. Johnson is a guest student, not a regular Westfield attendee. A situation that perhaps warrants reconsideration, Dr. Williams suggested pointedly. Especially given what we've all witnessed today. Ms. Reynolds, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. With all due respect, Dr. Williams, one performance doesn't erase a history of behavioral issues. This boy has a documented incident of classroom disruption at his previous school. You mean the incident where Marcus corrected a factual error and was physically assaulted by a teacher as a result? Dr. Williams's voice remained calm, but his eyes flashed dangerously. The same incident that left him with chronic back pain that prevents him from sitting comfortably for extended periods. That behavioral issue? A murmur ran through the assembled parents and students. Ms. Reynolds's face paled slightly. These are serious allegations, Director Miller said stiffly. Not allegations. Facts. Facts documented by medical records, witness statements, and a confidential settlement agreement that the school district very much hoped would remain private. Dr. Williams placed a protective hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus doesn't stand during performances out of disrespect, but out of necessity. The atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. What had begun as Marcus's isolated struggle had transformed into a public reckoning, with lines being drawn between those who recognized injustice and those who perpetuated it. Harlow, sensing the changing tide, attempted to regain control. Perhaps we should return to the scheduled program. We still have several matters to address before. Actually, Jonathan Parker interrupted, checking his watch. I'd be very interested in hearing more about Dr. Williams's program. Perhaps over lunch? I've been looking for meaningful educational initiatives to support. The implication was clear. Parker's financial interest was shifting away from Westfield and toward Dr. Williams's community work. Director Miller's expression tightened further as she watched her largest donor prepare to leave with the very people she had marginalized. As they gathered their things, Dr. Williams leaned close to Marcus. You did it, son. You showed them exactly who you are and what you're capable of. I couldn't be prouder. For the first time in 3 days, Marcus smiled without reservation. Something fundamental had changed, not just in how others saw him, but in how he saw himself. As Marcus, Dr. Williams, and Jonathan Parker prepared to leave the rehearsal hall, Victor Harlow's voice cut through the murmurs of the dispersing audience. A moment, please. His tone had lost some of its previous condescension. While I appreciate enthusiasm, this masterclass is not yet concluded. Dr. Williams turned slowly. Is there something else you wish to address, Victor? Indeed. Harlow straightened his jacket, reassuming his authoritative persona. I've been commissioned by the National Young Artists Competition to identify exceptional talents for their showcase next month. As chief adjudicator, I have the authority to offer one direct placement. He paused dramatically. I had intended to announce this at the conclusion of our session. The students who had been gathering their belongings froze, attention riveted on Harlow. Director Miller's expression brightened considerably at this unexpected development. The NYAC is the most prestigious youth competition in the country, she explained for the benefit of the parents. Direct placement is extremely rare. Charles Richardson stepped forward eagerly. Mr. Harlow, I would be honored to. I haven't made my decision yet, Harlow interrupted, raising a hand. His gaze shifted to Marcus, calculation evident in his eyes. In fact, today's performances have been more diverse than anticipated. Jonathan Parker folded his arms, watching the scene with interest. A competition, you say? I serve on the board of the NYAC Foundation. I wasn't aware you'd been given unilateral selection authority, Victor. A flicker of annoyance crossed Harlow's face. A recent arrangement, Jonathan. In the interest of discovering overlooked talent. How fortuitous, Dr. Williams remarked dryly. Harlow ignored the comment. I propose a challenge. An equal playing field, if you will. He scanned the room. 2 students will perform the same piece, the first movement of Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto. 30 minutes of preparation time, then a direct comparison. The winner receives the NYAC placement. Marcus recognized the strategy immediately. The Tchaikovsky was notoriously difficult, and without proper preparation, almost impossible to execute well. This was Harlow's attempt to reassert control, to publicly validate his initial dismissal of Marcus's abilities. And who would these 2 students be? Dr. Williams asked, though everyone already knew the answer. Charles Richardson, my most promising student from this master class, Harlow said, gesturing to the smug-looking boy. And Mr. Johnson, whose Bach has created such a stir. Director Miller clapped her hands together. What an opportunity. Charles has been working on the Tchaikovsky for nearly a year, haven't you, Charles? The implication was clear, this was designed to be an unfair competition. Marcus felt his throat tighten. The Tchaikovsky was far outside his current repertoire. He had listened to it countless times, even attempted passages for fun, but never seriously studied it. To attempt it now, with minimal preparation against someone who had been polishing it for months, seemed destined for failure. Marcus doesn't need to prove himself further, Dr. Williams said firmly. Afraid he can't handle real competition? Harlow countered. Before Dr. Williams could respond, Marcus spoke up. I'll do it. Marcus, Dr. Williams cautioned quietly, the Tchaikovsky requires extensive preparation. This isn't a fair test. It never is, Marcus replied, meeting his mentor's concerned gaze. But I'd rather try and fail than walk away. Jonathan Parker was watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Courage. I like that. He checked his watch. I can delay my next appointment. This should be illuminating. The room buzzed with excitement as Harlow laid out the terms. Each student would have 30 minutes to prepare in separate practice rooms, then perform the exposition section of the first movement, approximately 4 minutes of extraordinarily demanding music. As Marcus gathered his violin, Eliza approached him. That was a setup, she whispered. Charles has been practicing the concerto since last summer. His father hired one of the symphony's violinists as his private coach. I know, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. But sometimes you have to play the game to change the rules. Dr. Williams walked with Marcus to the practice room, his expression grave. You don't have to do this. You've already proven your worth today. Not to myself, Marcus replied. Not completely. He looked up at his mentor. Will you help me for these 30 minutes? Dr. Williams's concern melted into determination. Absolutely. Let's make the most of this time. As they entered the small practice room, Marcus could feel the pain in his back intensifying from the stress and standing. But something else was growing stronger, his resolve. Win or lose, he would play his truth. In the adjacent practice room, Charles Richardson smiled confidently as he ran through the familiar passages of Tchaikovsky with practiced ease. For him, this was merely a formality, a public coronation of his assumed superiority. Director Miller hovered nearby, ensuring everything was perfect for her star pupil. "This will put Westfield on the map," she told him excitedly. "The NYAC placement practically guarantees conservatory admission." Back in Marcus's practice room, a very different scene unfolded. Dr. Williams had pulled up a recording of the Tchaikovsky on his phone, and they were rapidly identifying the most crucial passages to focus on. "Don't try to play it note perfect," Dr. Williams advised. "Focus on the architecture, the emotional core. Make it yours, even if it's not textbook." Marcus nodded, absorbing everything, his fingers flying across the strings as they worked through the most challenging sections. The music was fiendishly difficult, octaves, rapid scale passages, and awkward string crossings all compressed into a virtuosic showcase. As the 30 minutes drew to a close, a knock on the door signaled time was up. Marcus took a deep breath, looking to Dr. Williams for final guidance. "Remember," his mentor said quietly, "technique impresses judges, but music touches souls. Play your truth, Marcus. Everything else is just noise." With that, they returned to the rehearsal hall, where an atmosphere of tense anticipation had settled over the assembled students, parents, and faculty. Charles was already at the front, violin at the ready, a picture of confident preparation. Victor Harlow stood at center stage, once again in his element as the authoritative arbiter of talent. "Ladies and gentlemen, our challenge is about to begin. Mr. Richardson will perform first, followed by Mr. Johnson. The superior performance will receive my endorsement for the National Young Artists Competition." As Charles raised his violin to begin, Marcus closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. When he opened them again, he caught Eliza giving him an encouraging thumbs up from across the room. Whatever happened next, he was no longer invisible. Charles Richardson played with the confidence of privilege and extensive preparation. His rendition of the Tchaikovsky was technically impressive, clean, precise, and delivered with mechanical accuracy. His fingers navigated the difficult passages with practiced ease, and his tone was consistently pleasing. The audience nodded appreciatively as he executed particularly challenging sections without visible effort. Victor Harlow watched with evident satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of performance he valued, controlled, polished, and conforming to established interpretive traditions. When Charles finished with a flourish, Harlow led the enthusiastic applause. "Exemplary technique," he announced. "The product of proper training and disciplined practice. Thank you, Charles." Director Miller beamed proudly, and Ms. Reynolds nodded in vindication. This was the expected outcome, their system working as designed, elevating those who followed the prescribed path to success. "And now," Harlow continued, making little effort to hide his skepticism, "Mr. Johnson will attempt the same piece." The word "attempt" hung in the air, a subtle reminder to everyone that Marcus was expected to fail. As Marcus walked to the performance area, he felt the weight of those expectations pressing down on him alongside the persistent pain in his back. Taking his position, Marcus became acutely aware of the stark contrast between himself and Charles. Where the other boy had expensive clothing, a high-end instrument, and years of elite training, Marcus stood in his modest public school clothes with his second-hand violin and community college education. "Whenever you're ready," Harlow said with thinly veiled condescension. "Or if you'd prefer to withdraw, there would be no shame in recognizing the challenge is beyond your current abilities." The invitation to quit was clear. Marcus glanced toward Dr. Williams, who gave him a subtle nod of encouragement, then to Eliza, whose face reflected complete faith in him. Even Jonathan Parker leaned forward with interest, seemingly more curious about Marcus's attempt than he had been during Charles's polished performance. Marcus raised his violin, adjusting his stance to minimize his back pain. The first notes of the Tchaikovsky concerto were supposed to enter like a whisper, a gentle invitation before the storm of virtuosity that followed. Marcus began softly, his initial notes tentative as he found his way into unfamiliar territory. After a few phrases, someone snickered. From the corner of his eye, Marcus could see Ms. Reynolds whispering to Director Miller, both wearing expressions of vindicated disapproval. The message was clear: the community college boy was out of his depth, just as they had predicted. A wrong note slipped out as Marcus navigated a particularly tricky passage, followed by another. The same section Charles had played flawlessly now exposed every gap in Marcus's preparation. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he pushed forward, determined not to give up despite the growing evidence that Harlow's challenge had achieved its intended purpose. Victor Harlow watched with barely concealed satisfaction as Marcus struggled. This public demonstration would restore the natural order, reaffirming that true excellence required the very system Marcus had bypassed. As the difficult runs and double stops of the development section approached, Marcus's fingers faltered again. The technical demands of Tchaikovsky's writing were merciless, designed to showcase virtuosity developed through years of specialized training. Without those specific exercises and studies, certain passages remained nearly impossible to execute cleanly. The pain in Marcus's back flared sharply as he shifted his weight, causing a grimace that several audience members noticed. Dr. Williams's expression darkened with concern, clearly wondering if he should intervene. Yet something unexpected was happening beneath the technical imperfections. Despite the missed notes and simplified passages, there was an emotional authenticity emerging in Marcus's playing. Where Charles had delivered technical perfection without personal connection, Marcus was offering something more vulnerable and human, a raw, imperfect truth. The contradiction wasn't lost on everyone. Jonathan Parker's expression had shifted from polite interest to genuine engagement. Even a few of the students were watching with newfound respect, recognizing the courage it took to continue under such adverse circumstances. As Marcus approached the concerto's famous cadenza, a section of unaccompanied virtuosity where the soloist showcases their technical brilliance, he faced a critical decision. The cadenza Charles had played was the standard one, meticulously prepared and executed with textbook precision. Marcus had never studied it formally. For a moment, Marcus hesitated, the bow hovering above the strings. The audience held its collective breath, many expecting him to stop altogether. Victor Harlow's expression was one of barely contained triumph. Here was the inevitable moment of surrender. Instead, Marcus closed his eyes and did something unexpected. Rather than attempting to replicate Charles's cadenza, he began to improvise one of his own, building on Bach-like elements from the chaconne he knew so well, but weaving in Tchaikovsky's thematic material. It wasn't traditional. It wasn't what was written on the page. But it was authentically his. Harlow's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Director Miller appeared scandalized by this departure from the sacred text. But Dr. Williams smiled with quiet pride, recognizing that Marcus had found a way to transform a potential humiliation into an act of creative courage. As the improvised cadenza built toward its conclusion, something shifted in the atmosphere of the rehearsal hall. The students who had dismissed Marcus were now watching with undisguised curiosity. Eliza's face shone with admiration. Even a few parents who had previously ignored him were paying close attention. The cadenza concluded, bringing Marcus back to Tchaikovsky's written notes as he moved toward the conclusion of the exposition. Though still imperfect technically, his playing had taken on a new dimension, the sound of someone playing not to impress judges or conform to expectations, but to express something genuine. As he approached the final phrases of the section, Marcus looked up briefly and locked eyes with Victor Harlow. In that moment of connection, something imperceptible passed between them, a challenge from the student to the master that went beyond notes on a page. When the final note sounded, the rehearsal hall fell completely silent. In the suspended silence following Marcus's final note, time seemed to stand still. No one moved. No one applauded. The unexpectedness of what they had just witnessed, not technical perfection but something perhaps more valuable, had left the audience momentarily unable to process their response. Marcus stood alone, bow still poised over the strings, his breath coming in shallow gasps from the exertion and emotion of the performance. Pain radiated through his back, but it seemed distant now, secondary to the strange sense of liberation he felt. He had played his truth, regardless of the consequences. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats, 4, 5. Then, from the back of the room, Jonathan Parker stood and began to applaud, slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. Dr. Williams joined immediately, followed by Eliza. One by one, others joined until the applause filled the rehearsal hall. Victor Harlow remained seated, his expression unreadable as he studied Marcus with new eyes. In his decades-long career, he had heard countless technically flawless performances that left him unmoved. What he had just witnessed was something rarer, authentic musical voice emerging through technical imperfection. As the applause continued, Marcus lowered his violin, allowing himself a small smile of relief and gratitude. Though his performance hadn't matched Charles's technical precision, he had played with his whole heart, and something about that seemed to have connected with the audience in an unexpected way. "Well," Harlow said finally, rising to his feet as the applause subsided. "That was certainly unconventional." Director Miller stepped forward quickly. "I think we can all appreciate the effort, but clearly Charles's performance demonstrated the superior technique and preparation expected at the NYAC level." "Technique isn't everything," Jonathan Parker interjected, approaching the front of the room. "I've heard technically perfect performances that put me to sleep. This young man played with something more valuable, authenticity." "With all due respect, Mr. Parker," Ms. Reynolds said, "competitions like NYAC have specific standards. Improvising cadenzas might be creative, but it's hardly appropriate for classical competition." Parker raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? Perhaps someone should inform Beethoven, Mozart, and every other classical composer who expected soloists to improvise their cadenzas." His tone was light but carried the weight of authority. The tradition of written-out cadenzas is relatively modern. Originally, they were vehicles for personal expression. As the adults debated, Marcus found himself transported back to his earliest memory of falling in love with the violin. He was 6 years old, watching a street performer in the park near their apartment. The man didn't play with technical perfection, but with such joy and expression that young Marcus had stood transfixed, tears rolling down his cheeks without him knowing why. When the performance ended, he had tugged on his mother's sleeve and whispered, "I want to make people feel like that." That memory had sustained him through years of struggle, hours of practice in their small apartment, learning from YouTube videos before Dr. Williams discovered him, enduring dismissal and prejudice from those who saw only his race and background, not his passion and potential. Now, standing in this hall of privilege with his second-hand violin, Marcus realized that he had achieved that childhood goal. Whatever Harlow decided, he had made people feel something authentic. "If I may," Dr. Williams said, interrupting the increasingly heated debate, "perhaps we should consider what these performances tell us about the musicians themselves. Charles played with admirable technical precision that speaks to his dedicated training. Marcus played with emotional depth and creative courage that speaks to his unique artistic voice. Both qualities have value in music." Victor Harlow, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, finally spoke. The purpose of this challenge was to identify extraordinary talent. He paused, looking between Charles and Marcus. "What constitutes extraordinary is perhaps more complex than I initially presented." A murmur ran through the audience. This was not the definitive judgment in Charles's favor that most had expected. "Mr. Harlow," Director Miller said with barely concealed alarm, "surely you aren't suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything yet, Director Miller," Harlow interrupted. "I'm contemplating." He turned to Marcus. "Young man, your technical execution had obvious flaws. Yet your musicality and your improvisational cadenza showed exceptional creative thinking. Where did you learn to improvise in that style?" Marcus swallowed nervously. "I didn't, exactly. I've studied Bach deeply, and I noticed structural similarities between Bach's writing and portions of Tchaikovsky's themes. I just followed where the music seemed to want to go." "Followed where the music wanted to go," Harlow repeated, a hint of wonder in his voice. "Do you hear that, Charles? That's either naive romanticism or profound musical intuition." He shook his head slowly. "And I'm no longer certain which." Charles's face had turned an unflattering shade of red. "But my performance was technically superior. Everyone heard it." "Yes," Harlow agreed. "Technically superior in nearly every measurable way. Yet I find myself thinking more about Mr. Johnson's performance than yours. That is, unexpected. Dr. Williams placed a supportive hand on Marcus's shoulder. Music exists to move people, to communicate something beyond technical execution. That's what distinguishes an artist from a technician. As these words settled over the room, Jonathan Parker stepped forward again. Victor, I believe we have an opportunity here that transcends your original challenge. The NYAC was founded to discover and nurture exceptional young talent, not just technical proficiency, but artistic potential. Perhaps both these young men deserve recognition, albeit for different qualities. Victor Harlow straightened his jacket, clearly unaccustomed to having his authority questioned. Yet something had shifted in his demeanor, a hint of self-reflection that hadn't been present before. Mr. Parker makes an interesting point, he said finally. Perhaps this challenge has revealed something unexpected about the nature of musical excellence itself. The room held its breath, waiting for his verdict. In that moment of suspension, Marcus realized that regardless of what came next, something fundamental had changed. He had been seen, truly seen, not as a curiosity or an outsider, but as a musician with something valuable to contribute. For the boy who had stood for 3 days, enduring dismissal and prejudice, that recognition was its own form of victory. The tension in the rehearsal hall was palpable as Victor Harlow stood at the center, all eyes upon him. The famous violinist seemed uncharacteristically thoughtful, as though wrestling with concepts that challenged his long-held beliefs about musical excellence. In my 40 years as a performer and teacher, he began, I have emphasized technical precision as the foundation of artistry. Without technique, expression is limited by capability. He nodded toward Charles. Mr. Richardson's performance exemplified the results of this philosophy, clean, accurate, and technically accomplished. Charles straightened proudly while Director Miller nodded in satisfaction. However, Harlow continued, his tone shifting, technique without soul creates music that is merely correct rather than moving. His gaze turned to Marcus. Mr. Johnson's performance had technical flaws, yet possessed something that cannot be taught in any conservatory, an authentic musical voice and creative courage. Marcus stood perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe as Harlow's words washed over him. The question before me is what constitutes true excellence in music? Is it technical perfection? Or is it the ability to move listeners despite technical limitations? Harlow spread his hands. As adjudicator for the NYAC, I must consider not just what these young musicians are now, but what they might become. Jonathan Parker stepped forward. If I may, Victor, there's something else you should know. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, then held it up. Does this young man look familiar to you? On the screen was a video thumbnail showing Marcus, slightly younger, performing on a small stage. Harlow leaned closer, then his eyes widened in recognition. This is the viral performance from the East Grove Community Festival. That was you? He asked Marcus directly. Marcus nodded, confused by this sudden turn. Yes, sir. Last year. Jonathan Parker pressed play, and the sound of Marcus playing a hauntingly beautiful rendition of Saint-Saëns, The Swan, filled the room. Even on the small phone speaker, the emotional depth of the performance was evident. 3 million views, Parker said as he stopped the video. I chair the NYAC Foundation's Digital Outreach Committee. This video has been shared more times than any performance in our organization's history. We've been trying to identify this young violinist for months. A collective gasp went through the room. Ms. Reynolds and Director Miller exchanged alarmed glances, suddenly realizing the magnitude of their misjudgment. You knew about this, Dr. Williams? Harlow asked. Of course, Dr. Williams replied. Marcus has extraordinary talent that transcends his circumstances. That's why I've been mentoring him for years, and why I brought him to your masterclass. Not for validation, but for the opportunity to learn from one of the best. Harlow turned back to Marcus. Why didn't you mention this video when you introduced yourself? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I didn't think it was relevant, sir. It wasn't a formal classical performance, just a community event. My mother recorded it on her phone. Not relevant. Harlow seemed genuinely perplexed. Young man, do you understand how rare it is for a classical performance to resonate with millions of viewers? I just played how the music made me feel, Marcus said simply. Something in this answer seemed to affect Harlow deeply. The famous violinist looked down at his own hands, hands that had executed countless technically perfect performances on the world's greatest stages, and then back at the young man before him. Charles, Harlow said finally, your technique is exemplary, and you should be proud of your accomplishment. With continued dedication, you will undoubtedly become an excellent violinist. Charles nodded, but his expression had grown uncertain, sensing that something unexpected was happening. However, Harlow continued, the NYAC was established to identify not just technical proficiency, but extraordinary artistic potential. He turned to Marcus. Mr. Johnson, despite your technical imperfections, you possess something that cannot be taught, an authentic voice and the courage to express it. The room fell completely silent. My recommendation to the NYAC will be to create 2 placements this year, one recognizing technical excellence, and one recognizing artistic potential. Both Charles and Marcus will be invited to perform. Director Miller's mouth fell open in shock. Charles looked simultaneously relieved and disappointed, recognized, but forced to share the spotlight he had assumed would be exclusively his. Additionally, Harlow continued, I would like to offer Marcus a full scholarship to my summer intensive program in New York. His talent requires nurturing, not just in technique, but in preserving the unique perspective he brings to his interpretations. Tears welled in Marcus's eyes as the implications of this offer sank in. A summer studying with one of the world's premier violinists would open doors he had only dreamed of. Mr. Harlow, Director Miller interjected, while your generosity is commendable, there are processes for scholarship nominations. This is my personal scholarship, Director Miller, Harlow interrupted firmly. From my foundation, not Westfield's. And I'll be speaking with the board about Ms. Reynolds's conduct as well. Physical punishment of students is unacceptable in any educational context. Ms. Reynolds paled visibly as all eyes turned to her. Jonathan Parker cleared his throat. On that note, the NYAC Foundation would be very interested in supporting Dr. Williams's community music program. Talent clearly exists beyond the confines of our traditional institutions, and we have a responsibility to nurture it wherever it's found. As the adults continued discussing logistics, Eliza approached Marcus. You were amazing, she whispered. I knew from the first day you were different. Different in the best possible way. Marcus smiled gratefully, still processing everything that had happened. In the span of 3 days, he had gone from being ignored and dismissed to receiving opportunities beyond his wildest expectations. Dr. Williams joined them, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. You did it, son. Not by becoming what they wanted you to be, but by remaining true to who you are. As Marcus looked around the rehearsal hall, at Harlow's newfound respect, at Jonathan Parker's enthusiastic support, at the students now viewing him with admiration rather than dismissal, he realized that he had accomplished something more significant than winning a competition placement. He had changed how they saw him, and perhaps, how some of them saw themselves. In that moment of silence and revelation, standing still despite his pain, Marcus Johnson had transformed from an outsider to a musician whose voice demanded to be heard. 1 year later, Marcus Johnson stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, violin in hand, listening to the gentle murmur of the audience filling the legendary venue. His fingers traced the smooth wood of his new instrument, a fine Italian violin on loan from the Young Artists Foundation, worlds away from the second-hand instrument he had played at Westfield Academy. Nervous? Dr. Williams asked, adjusting Marcus's bow tie. A little, Marcus admitted with a smile. But the good kind of nervous. So much had changed in a year. The summer intensive with Victor Harlow had transformed Marcus's technique without diminishing his unique voice. Harlow had proven to be a demanding but surprisingly compassionate mentor, once his preconceptions had been challenged. The famous violinist had helped Marcus secure a partial scholarship to Juilliard's pre-college program, where he now studied alongside many of the country's most promising young musicians, including Eliza, who had become one of his closest friends. Perhaps most significantly, Dr. Williams's community music program had received substantial funding from the NYAC Foundation. Jonathan Parker had kept his word, establishing a talent development initiative specifically designed to identify promising musicians from underserved communities. The program now bore Marcus's name, the Marcus Johnson Initiative for Musical Excellence, a responsibility he carried with both pride and humility. 5 minutes, Mr. Johnson, the stage manager announced. Dr. Williams squeezed his shoulder encouragingly. Remember what we always say. Play my truth, Marcus replied with a confident nod. As he prepared to walk on stage, Marcus caught sight of his mother standing in the wings, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Sophia Johnson no longer worked double shifts. The settlement from Marcus's injury case had finally come through, along with a teaching position at Dr. Williams's expanded community program. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, embracing him carefully to avoid disturbing his concert attire. "Your father would be too." The mention of his father, a jazz saxophonist who had died when Marcus was just 4, brought a bittersweet smile to his face. Music had been their connection, their shared language, even after death had separated them. The stage manager signaled it was time. With one last deep breath, Marcus walked onto the illuminated stage of Carnegie Hall, the weight of the moment balanced by the lightness in his heart. His back still troubled him occasionally, but physical therapy and proper treatment had made a tremendous difference. More importantly, he had learned to transform pain into expression rather than limitation. As he took his position at center stage, Marcus saw familiar faces in the audience. Director Miller sat stiffly in the third row, her presence a concession to the changing relationship between Westfield and the community program. Several rows back, Ms. Reynolds watched with an unreadable expression. Her formal reprimand and mandatory sensitivity training had been a small but significant victory against institutional indifference. In the front row, Victor Harlow sat with perfect posture, his expression no longer condescending but attentive and respectful. Beside him, Charles Richardson waited his turn to perform. Their initial rivalry had evolved into a complicated but genuine mutual respect. As Marcus raised his violin, the hall fell silent. Here, on one of the world's most prestigious stages, he prepared to play the same piece that had started everything a year ago, Bach's Chaconne. But this time, he would play it without the burden of proving himself, without the weight of others' judgments and expectations. The first note emerged pure and confident, setting the journey in motion. As he played, Marcus moved with the music, each phrase telling the story not just of Bach's composition but of his own path, the struggle, the pain, the persistence, and ultimately, the triumph of being truly seen and heard. In the audience, people who had witnessed many performances by the world's greatest musicians found themselves moved in unexpected ways. There was technical skill here, certainly. A year of intensive training had refined Marcus's natural abilities, but there was also something rarer, authenticity that transcended technique, emotion that reached beyond the notes on the page. When the final note faded into reverent silence, Marcus lowered his violin slowly. For a heartbeat, the hall remained perfectly still, a moment of collective recognition that they had experienced something extraordinary. Then the applause began, rising like a wave until it filled every corner of Carnegie Hall. As Marcus took his bow, he caught sight of Dr. Williams and his mother in the wings, both openly weeping now. Beyond them stood a group of children from the community program, the next generation of musicians who would no longer have to fight quite so hard for their chance to be heard. In that moment of triumph, Marcus understood that his journey had never really been about proving his worth to others. It had been about discovering that his worth had been there all along, waiting like music itself to be expressed in his own unique voice. As he took a second bow, Marcus Johnson, the boy who once stood alone against prejudice and dismissal, now stood tall amid recognition and respect, his violin not just an instrument of wood and string, but a vessel for truth that could no longer be silenced. Dear friend, this story reminds us that talent doesn't discriminate, but people often do. Every day, brilliant minds and gifted hands are overlooked simply because of who they are or where they come from. True excellence isn't about pedigree or privilege. It's about passion, perseverance, and the courage to stand tall even when the world tells you to sit down. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful narratives that challenge prejudice and celebrate the triumph of the human spirit. Together, we can amplify voices that deserve to be heard and create a world where no one's music goes unplayed.